There's no denying that today our world has been revolutionized by politics and also by the economic agenda. From the country all the way to China and also the United States of America. Both countries today are also in another type of competition, which is technology. All the way from artificial intelligence and also today, one of the hottest topics that we're addressing, which is ChatGPT. Here's an interesting question. What is the ChatGPT, and how should we understand the existence of this mechanism? Some believe because the revolution of ChatGPT could actually bring harm to the artificial intelligence in the long run. Well, how about that? And does that mean the ChatGPT is going to replace the existence of artificial intelligence? And what about the issues and the problems cannot be solved by technology today? Is China actually winning the war in technology nowadays? Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this episode, we are going to address all those questions by speaking to our distinguished speaker, which is Dr. Chakravorti. Again, Dr. Chakravorti is the Dean of Global Business at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He is the founding executive director of the Fletcher's Institute for Business in the Global Context, where he established and chairs the Digital Planet Research Program. Well, Professor Chakravorti, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me, Will. Always good to talk to you.
Well, Professor, I want to get started again. As we mentioned before, today when we are talking about, all those buzzwords that related to technological advancement, all the way from artificial intelligence and to ChatGPT, let's go to the ChatGPT for a second. Recently, you came out with a brand new article, which is entitled, How GPT Mania Could Harm AI Innovation. Professor, help us to understand what is actually the definition or the function of ChatGPT, and why is it so popular today, globally speaking?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Will. But ChatGPT is, I guess, that's the informal term, the more nerdy way of describing this suite of applications of artificial intelligence is GPT, or Generative Pre-trainer Transformer. And it's a type of generative artificial intelligence. And the way it works is by using neural networks that are essentially large language models that are trained on massive amounts of data. And a lot of the data is open access, and depending on who the trainer is, you might have access to an enormous amount of proprietary data as well. And at the other end, what these algorithms allow you to do post-training is that it can perform many different tasks that we, normally would do ourselves, or turn to an incredibly efficient and knowledgeable assistant. So it could involve things such as answering questions to a prompt, or it could allow you to write an essay based on the prompt you give them, or create images based on, questions and prompts, and even generate lines of code in a program, or a cooking recipe, or some kind of a formula. And all of this done in natural language, easily understandable language. So the distinction between the answer you get from a GPT algorithm relative to something that we all use and recognize, the search bar on Google, is that the search bar on Google, when you ask it a question or you put in a search term, it will respond with a series of links to other web pages. And here, GPT is going to respond in, a narrative form, and essentially synthesize the information from many different sources into essentially a chat that we all recognize as human beings as a regular answer to a regular question.
Well, Professor, again, it's so interesting and fascinating to hear how this machine can actually do the work or perform even much better than human brains. But meanwhile, in reality, again, I want to go back to the article. It's so, I guess it's amusing to see the title of your article that says that the existence of the ChatGPT could actually harm the AI innovation. Because again, several years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, when artificial intelligence appeared on the market, everyone believed the whole world will be revolutionized to the next level. But meanwhile, experts also point out that this machine or this mechanism is full of loopholes and also mistakes. So in other words, it's rather dangerous to place the 100% reliability on it. But now, what is actually conflict between the GPT and the AI innovation today? And why do you think the existence of GPT could actually harm the development of artificial intelligence? What do you say to that, sir?
Sure. So a couple of things I want to clarify. One is it's not entirely clear that a GPT algorithm or ChatGPT necessarily does things better than a human being. It does something in terms of its response, which seems like there is a human who's responding. And in some cases, the response is better than what a human can do, typical human you come across. And in many other cases, it does not. So it's not there yet in terms of exceeding the capacity of all humans or even the average human, just depending on the circumstance and the context, right? So we just have to be clear that we're, still very, very early in the development of this, potentially exciting, area of artificial intelligence. It is, of course, very clear that the state of development has been astoundingly fast, and the response one gets from a ChatGPT is quite impressive. And in many ways, people on the other end, when they're submitting a question or submitting a prompt, may not be able to tell the difference between, whether this has been responded or an essay has been created by a human being or by a machine. So that is very impressive. So I just want to clarify that we're not still better than human beings. Second is the fact that, what you just noted, the response you get from GPT is not 100% accurate. It basically goes out and starts looking at all the data that its algorithms are trained on in order to come back with an answer to your question. And sometimes the data is incorrect. Sometimes the data is missing. Sometimes the data is contradictory. And what the algorithm does is there's nothing evil built into the algorithm, but it does its best, and it sort of integrates whatever it finds. And when it doesn't find the information it's looking for, sometimes it just sort of fills in the gaps and essentially makes things up. So you might end up with a response that is, on target. It could be mildly off target, or it could be completely false. So all of that is possible. So that's an issue. And of course, it could undermine confidence in artificial intelligence. So, that's one reason to, continue to watch it and be careful about how one uses it. But my argument as to why GPT mania, and I say GPT mania because we now cannot turn anywhere and not learn about the latest craze about GPT and the GPT race that has developed not only across companies but across countries. In particular, the US and China are in a race, not just for AI dominance but for GPT dominance. So we're just sort of hearing about this everywhere. So my concern is that the race to dominate this space is going to divert essential resources towards the GPT applications and potentially take those scarce resources away from other applications of AI, in particular, societally more meaningful applications of artificial intelligence. And an example of that is application of AI to saving human life, whether it's in healthcare or drug development or a response to a disaster. AI has increasingly become a critical tool in those areas, and there is an enormous amount of opportunity to deploy this powerful technology there. And my concern is now with the major Silicon Valley firms or the major firms in Shenzhen, all putting their resources, the AI resources, into ChatGPT or GPT, new generations of GPT. We are going to be slowing down and potentially even hurting the process of innovation in these more important areas of AI.
Professor, again, I'm very glad that you mentioned the two countries. As I also mentioned before, today, when we talk about this competitive race between China and the US, it's beyond political or economic agenda. Now, technological advancement top the priority. Again, despite what the naysayers or despite the media reports. And also, I want to go back to the article. Again, Professor, this is something that you wrote. You said the intense focus on the GPT race in both countries has led to even further rifts between Washington and Beijing. Now, help us understand. As you mentioned, Professor, GPT, it's a brand new type of mechanism. It's a brand new type of product. But everyone is asking the question, since it's brand new, what is the problem with collaboration? So in other words, if we just put political and social economic differences on the side, in order to advance these technological tools, in order to receive much greater benefits for the human race, why the two countries cannot collaborate, and we have to see the rift, or we have to see this competitiveness between the two countries. How would you explain that, Dr. Chakravorti?
Sure. I think it's interesting that you raised this, notion of collaboration versus competition between the two technological superpowers, the United States and China. And this may come as a surprise to a lot of your listeners. Actually, the United States and China are huge collaborators on artificial intelligence. The number of AI research collaborations between American and Chinese teams increased 4 times since 2010. Increased 4 times. Okay, so there has been a lot of cooperative work going on, and I think a lot of people will find that very, very surprising. And what happened was pre-pandemic, right around 2019, it hit its peak. And since then, it's been declining. And even after the decline, the US and China are the biggest collaborators on our artificial intelligence, simply because, the massive amount of research that's being done in this area are in these two countries. So what has happened is post this GPT mania, both countries are now focusing their talent and money and data and other resources towards their own dominance of this area. So we are going to see an intense refocus on your own development rather than the collective development, because, as I said, we are in a race in terms of who's going to get ahead in this GPT area.
That's right.
So we're definitely witnessing a competition. The second point is useful to make is that the resources we're talking about, they're all in short supply. They're all in short supply. The most important resource in artificial intelligence is actually human intelligence. It takes real human beings to develop these algorithms, to train these algorithms, to find the right data sets, and then to be able to interpret what happens at the other end. And that requires an enormous amount of trained technologists, not just machine learning technologists, data analytics technologists, other engineers, people who are coders, people who are design thinkers, people who are project managers. These are skills that are in short supply. So each country and each company is going to be allocating it to one project or the other. And if you're in a GPT race, you'll be allocating it towards all things GPT. In addition to the people, what's missing or what's limited is money. Another thing that's limited is data. These algorithms learn from access to vast amounts of data. And data has to be accessible. It's not just enough for data to be generated. Data has to be accessible. Today, China is the world's largest consumer and producer of data. The United States is number 2. And so whoever has access to those massive pools of data does have access to a huge resource for training algorithms. And finally, a really important resource is the what I would call the governance resource that includes regulators, ethicists, thought leaders who understand and imagine what this technology can do for us in a kind of a broader, big picture way, and create frameworks and guardrails for which areas we should be directing these resources towards and which areas we should be staying away from, and also keeping an eye out for the potential for bias and discrimination. So there's a lot here. And so I'm sorry for the very long answer to your question, but there's just an enormous amount to unpack in this, relatively simple question.
Well, again, Professor, I really appreciate that you're able to help us and also help our viewers and audience understand this technological collaboration between the two countries. Now, I want to continue our conversation. Again, Professor, you mentioned in both countries, for example, in the US at the Silicon Valley, again, in the article, you mentioned companies such as Microsoft and again, the Google, they're all get on the train or get on this unstoppable train in order to develop this GPT process. But meanwhile, domestically speaking, in China, there are also companies are racing itself in order to get ahead of the game. But meanwhile, in this article, it's so interesting that you mentioned that Elon Musk, and we know currently who's the owner of the Twitter, of course, you and I, we had a conversation about that. And I quote, it says, "We are summoning the demon." Now, help us with understanding. What does that mean when Elon Musk mentioned that we are summoning the demon? Is he, or how should we understand the drawbacks of GPT or artificial intelligence? And does that mean that we should be also concerned and worried about the existence of technological improvement or technological advancement? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think Elon Musk is always, an interesting person to try and interpret, because you're never quite sure of, his intentions or on any given day, whatever he says, whether you should put a huge amount of faith in it. But more significantly, Elon Musk and other, big names such as Steve Wozniak or Woz, who's one of the co-founders of Apple, or Yuval Noah Harari, who's a well-known, best-selling author, and several others have signed a letter which has called, and they've called for a 6-month moratorium on doing any development on GPT. And their concern is that the ability of the developers to understand what this technology will or will not do is limited, and we might be, essentially creating a Frankenstein's monster that gets out of control, and the developers inherently will not be able to control the outcomes of the algorithms that they put out, and because they're locked in this race, nobody's putting their heads up and looking into the horizon, towards the horizon, to see what this may or may not do. And I think that's a legitimate concern, because once this machine continues to learn and do better, it is very difficult for even the engineers who've devised it to be able to open the box and figure out what to do about it, or even potentially stop it. And it's not just Musk and Wozniak and Harari and several others who expressed this concern. Jeffrey Hinton, who most famously, very recently, he's still called the godfather of AI, used to work at Google and stepped down from Google in order to express his concerns. So I think this is a worry that a lot of people have. Of course, how do you follow up on this worry? Elon Musk has signed a letter, and as soon as he signed the letter, he went off and founded his own GPT venture. So I don't necessarily put a huge amount of faith in what Elon Musk says. Mostly, you need to watch what Elon Musk does.
Professor, I want to wrap up our conversation again as we're looking ahead. again, you mentioned artificial intelligence plays a significant role in healthcare. Again, this is one of the major critical, I guess, issues, not just happening outside US, but particularly inside the US. Now, again, Professor, you spent a good amount of time on this article explaining that how artificial intelligence is actually helping the development of healthcare system, and also the could possibly fix the current loopholes or dilemmas. Now, help us to understand in the long run how effective is artificial intelligence in terms of the healthcare system, and how much faith should we place in this artificial intelligence when we see the change and the modification of the healthcare system, particularly in the US.
Yeah, I think if you think about the application of artificial intelligence in healthcare, there are many very important signs to look at. We celebrated the arrival of ChatGPT with a massive amount of media focus and public interest in what this new technology can do ever since November of 2022. Another massive breakthrough in AI in the area of healthcare passed us by earlier in 2022 with a fraction of the coverage. And this is a development by a system called AlphaFold. And what it can do is AlphaFold demonstrated that it could predict the structure of almost every protein cataloged by science. And what that means in plain English is that it could revolutionize the discovery of new medicines and make it much more efficient to produce the drugs and produce the treatments and vaccines that we all rely on for our health and treatment of illnesses. And in the past and historically, it's been an extremely expensive and time-consuming process to develop drugs and new treatments. It takes decades. The failure rate is incredibly high, and it costs billions of dollars. And a lot of that time and money can be saved post our understanding of the structure of proteins that AlphaFold has enabled. So we are now looking ahead, opening a frontier to completely revolutionize drug discovery. But that requires resources. It requires more talent and money and data being put against this breakthrough so that it can translate into real life-saving and time-saving and money-saving opportunities. So my concern is we're not going to be able to do that if all of that, those resources are directed to GPT. Lots of other areas where artificial intelligence has proven to become an important tool. For instance, catching early signs of breast cancer on mammograms. Increasingly, AI has become a support system, a tool that radiologists turn to. And in many cases, it's actually finding cancers that an expert radiologist has not been able to spot. So this is another thing, for us to continue to work on. It's not just breast cancer, lots of other ways in which AI has become a diagnostic tool, such as, you and I are talking, and the AI system can gauge the way I talk and you talk and be able to tell, is there some cognitive issue that is affecting either one of us? That's powerful. Quite often doctors can't tell this. A family member can't tell this, but the algorithm might be able to catch, cognitive decline or some kind of a mental issue just by the sound of the voice or by intonation and facial expression and so on. That's the positive side. And yet another massive positive issue, and this is something that suggests how limited human intelligence itself is because we have limited memories. We have just declared the end of a pandemic. The WHO has just declared the end of the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's right.
Now, it is astounding that something as major as what hit us in 2020 has ended in 2023. And the reason for that is that in record time, we managed to discover vaccines that are highly effective. It has never happened before. this kind of a breakthrough and fast development of vaccines. Now, how did we get there? It took many different technological and scientific breakthroughs to get there. One major part of that was artificial intelligence. In the absence of the use of artificial intelligence, we would not be where we are today in terms of declaring an end to the pandemic. So these are things for us to keep in mind in terms of how critical this technology is to our lives and to our future. I'll make one more point and then shut up. During the pandemic, when hospital systems, healthcare systems were struggling to keep up with the patient load of people coming into these systems, and people just dying because you could not even diagnose, who had COVID and who did not, and who needed to be rushed to intensive care and who could be kept out in the corridor. Back then, we did not, and this is in the 2020. Back then, we did not have reliable tests, or even if we had a test, it took days, if not weeks, to tell if somebody was tested positive. Lots of AI algorithms had been developed to be able to tell if somebody has COVID based on an analysis of their symptoms. Most of them failed. Most of them failed. And as a result, we could not save many, 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 many lives. Now, most of them failed because they did not have adequate time, adequate resources, adequate data to train those algorithms. We have just completed the cycle of one pandemic. The next pandemic is going to be around the corner.
That's right.
No doubt about it.
That's right.
So why are we not thinking about now turning our attention and resources and data to make sure that we have these algorithms ready to catch the symptoms when the next thing strikes us? So with that rather dark thought, I'll give the floor back to you.
Well, again, Professor, this is a very alarming question, and believe me that you are not the only one who has been thinking about this. Of course, I 100% agree with you that when we are looking at the benefits of implementing artificial intelligence in our lives, but also on the other side is we need to learn the lessons from the previous pandemic and able to figure out the better strategies, how to tackle the next pandemic with better and more effective technological innovations. Again, not just the ChatGPT, not just the artificial intelligence, it's the collective effort globally. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Dr. Chakravorti. Again, Dr. Chakravorti is the Dean of the Global Business at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And again, his latest article is entitled How GPT Mania Could Harm AI Innovation. Professor, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the show. Again, it's always been a pleasure, and rather it's a treat to speak to someone like you and help us to understand it's not just about the artificial intelligence, it's really the deeper questions that we need to address today for the better future. So again, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Bill. Always a pleasure.